So we'll get started. All being well, everybody is seeing my introductory slide to today's event. It is on October 20th, and we're here at one of the Center ICE Jam events that we have every month. And this one is the second of two panels this week, focusing during Women Entrepreneurship Week. So this is in collaboration with Montclair State University that puts on events all around the country with collaborating institutions. There's about 200 events across the week. We had one earlier on Monday on two startup businesses that have connected and collaborated with the university. And today you'll be hearing from owners from two startup businesses that spun out of academic research at the university that have then gone on to success with funding opportunities, growth, and some that have continued in Alaska, and others that have looked at opportunities outside and continued to go. So just to let you know, if you're wondering who I might be in the group I represent, so I'm part of UAF's Center for Innovation, Commercialization, Entrepreneurship, Center ICE. We are based in Fairbanks at the main campus, but we also have a footprint across the state of Alaska, supporting those within the University of Alaska system on technology development. Both Bahara and Kelly have been supported by us for a few different types of projects, and also had interns that have worked with them on some project work. We have different types of funding opportunities that would be available and different types of programs within the university. You're listening in during the ICE Jam series. We have some customer discovery and user support funds called iCore program. And also we are building out events during what's known as Alaska Startup Week. And that's coming in November 8th through to the 12th. And for anybody that's at that beginning idea stage, they might have an idea ruminating in the background, wondering, well, where do I go to try and find collaborators and colleagues to work on it? We're actually running an online statewide startup weekend, the weekend of November 5th and 6th. So if you're interested in bringing an idea to the table or just wanting to learn from others across Alaska that might have some new innovative idea, then that might be a cool place to come in and just hang out for the weekend, grab your cups of tea like Kelly's doing, and just interact with that next generation of entrepreneurs that might be looking for a partner in a business, might be looking for a collaborator, and who knows, you may end up becoming just like Bahara and Kelly are here, coming in and presenting about the business that you've spun out. Just to remind you, if you've got any questions that you'd like to bring up to our two presenters today, then please put those in the Q&A or in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on those, and then you'll be able to have those discussed between the three of us at the end of our two presentations. We are recording the event, so just to remind everybody that that's the case, we'll be sharing it through Center ICE's YouTube channel. So if you want to watch it in the future, or send it along to a colleague or a friend that wasn't able to make it today. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Bahara to give a presentation on Barati Medical and the work that she's been doing there. And Bahara, all you just need to do is tell me when you want me to advance to the next slide.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you. So hello, everyone. It's great to be back at Center ICE, which feels like family. My name is Zainab Bahara Barati, and I'm the founder, CEO of my company, Barati Medical. Recently, I joined Allen Institute and Tiny Blue Dot Foundation as a scientific program manager, but I continue my entrepreneurial work at my company at the same time. Next slide, please. How the company started. So the idea of starting a business started when I was a postdoc at Kelly's lab. So you'll hear about her amazing work. So she's a great researcher, a scientist, and she's also a great academic entrepreneur. So she inspired me to translate the research and the technology that I knew about during my PhD research putting into practice and doing improvement in animal models. So at the time, Kelly's lab was doing some pilot studies for stroke treatment. And so we realized that the tools that we and others had in hand were not efficient. And so we were kind of like stuck with whatever we had. And as the kind of smaller lab and smaller university, we didn't have access to fancy equipment like MRI machines for lab animals. But we knew that the animal models need to improve. And I was very surprised when I looked at literature and realized that there are just so many clinical trials for stroke in particular that had failed. And there were a lot of controversy around animal models, how we do stroke models, how we monitor animals over time. And there was a lot of inconsistency, I would say, in animal models and the way that people run animal models. And so also, as you can imagine, there were a lot of arguments in losing public trust for basic science, because you receive a lot of grants and tax money to do research, but when all those research move to clinical trials, they fail. And so there is this question that what was the quality of those preclinical studies? So we knew that we need to improve animal models. And so stroke was, the major one for me, because I was a part of the lab that was doing this, and we knew that this needs to be improved. Next slide, please. So the problem, as I mentioned, is that just for stroke, for example, the medical cost associated with the stroke is just so high. And amazingly, it's just, more than 1,000 agents have been tested, and 300 of them have been candidates for clinical trials, and almost all of them have failed. And so we did some interviews that I will tell you more about later. And so one of the professors in this field said there are just many silver standards for preclinical stroke models, but there is no gold standard. And everyone does their own thing based on what they have in hand. But really, there is no gold standard for understanding how well you have executed the model and how to monitor your treatment over time. Next slide, please. So based on my PhD research, I was familiar with optical imaging, an optical imaging technique, which is based on near-infrared spectroscopy. And it just occurred to me that we might have a solution for this. So we knew that we needed something that is cost-effective for most universities. So very large research universities can afford doing MRIs on their animal models, but the smaller universities cannot afford it. And also, we knew that the existing technology for stroke models, which was laser Doppler flowmetry, which would invasively look at how well you have occluded a vessel to induce a stroke, that technique was not reliable. It was such a pain to use, and the data was not very consistent, so it did not associate with outcome. So you would expect that if you see a drop in blood flow, then you will see a large infarct or brain injury. But it wasn't the case. A lot of times these are not correlated. So even if you do it with much pain during the model, but at the end, it cannot tell you exactly if the injury that you are looking for was created. But with this technology, so we believe that we had the solution because we were looking at exactly that infarct formation. We were looking at how brain oxygenation is compromised during a stroke. And So, that can be done with, at a lower cost. And so also it could be done non-invasively. So you don't have to cut the animal's skin and put the probe onto the animal's skull, but rather you could just place it on the animal's head and just shave it and place it and leave the animal go, and they're their own thing in their home cages. So that way, not only you can monitor animal during the surgery and when you are inducing a stroke, but also later as you are administering different treatment, or just want to monitor an animal behavior, this technology would allow you to do that. So we thought that we have a solution for this problem. At least stroke was the first application that we thought of, and we started developing a prototype for animal models of stroke. Next, please. Luckily, I got a pilot project funding from Center ICE, and so we were able to develop a prototype for animal testing, and we got other supports as well, smaller supports from different innovation hubs. And so that allowed us to generate some data and apply for NIH SBIR phase 1 grants. And so after we got the grant, NIH invited the awardees to participate in something called I-Corps, and that is for customer discovery. So you would go and talk to end users and any stakeholder in between, because so you have the buyer, you have the labs PI, you have the postdocs, and you have the university purchasing department, and a lot of other people are involved within the process. And so through this I-Corps program, we were instructed to go and talk to those people involved in the process. And so you would start with an idea that, so this is my business model and this is how I think that I will do things. And then you go and test those hypotheses, because it's a lot like research. So you develop not just one, you develop multiple hypotheses around different business questions that you have. And then you go and validate them with through customers and through interviews that you do with your customers. And the trick is that when you go and talk to them, you don't tell them about what you are doing. Rather, you just go and let them walk you through the process and how they do things. You just tell them that, we are going to make something and we think that it will help this area. But you don't tell them exactly what you're doing. You never talk about, your product features. You don't tell them, oh, if are you ready to buy it from me? Because there's nothing ready to be marketed yet, right? And you don't want to bias their opinion. So you just let them talk, and through those interviews, you take some keywords to test your hypothesis. And this is what we did. We did around 110 interviews with the stakeholders. And so we refined our business thesis. So we started with a draft, and over time, like every week, we would come back and change this business thesis, because you want to be crystal clear about the value that you are delivering to your customers. And so at the end, this is what we came up with. So the stroke researchers will buy our device for real-time imaging of the brain lesions of small animals, and that will reduce the variability of animal models, and also it will be non-invasive, so it eliminates all the surgeries and complications associated with invasive approaches. Next, please. So this is the business model that we had. So through this training, which is very valuable, the instructors will ask you to use this template and fill out different parts of this template for, like, who are your key partners, what are your key activities, and especially in the middle, you see value proposition, which is very important. So you want to understand why someone should come and buy your device. And you should be very clear about that and honest with yourself what value you will add to your customer. And then, you know, you will have your customer segments, which is also important. So you want to make sure that you target the right customer segments. Next, please. And then we went and we did interviews again, as I said. So we started with researchers. We thought that anyone that does research with small animals would love our device. And then, you know, we kind of like within week 2, we realized that, oh, it may not be very true. So people say that, oh, this is really interesting. If something can do this would be interesting, but really they don't care. And then we kind of like, you know, got more focused around neurological disorders and models of neurological disorders such as TBI, such as stroke included also, and epilepsy. And so honestly, so we realized that a lot of people don't care. And because like it's so hard to really change the way that people are doing their things. But at the end, we thought, okay, so it seems that it's a good device for stroke researchers, because a lot of them complain about exactly the same things that you know, we were complaining about, and you know, the reason that we started the business. But that market is going to be very tiny. So if there are like, I don't know, even like, you know, 1,000 labs in the world that they do, you know, stroke research, they do ischemic stroke models, still it's a very tiny market. And, you know, price-wise also, it would not justify a viable business. So we thought, so this I-Core training is very interesting because you start with very high hopes. Then Kelly will agree with this. Then you say, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, nobody cares. And then there is an aha moment and you say, oh, maybe if these people don't care, maybe there are some other people that would care. And this happened to us as well. So through those interviews, it was interesting that it nicely tied together, because when we were talking to researchers and university faculty, we interviewed some faculty from the veterinary medicine department at UAF. So they were kind of like working with animals, but they were also treating animals, right? So when we talked to them, they said, you know, it may not be, you know, like for rodent models, it's, you know, whatever we have is fine. But in practice, we need something for animals that come to the clinic and an animal is unconscious, and, you know, they may have had, you know, a brain injury, or they may just not feel well. But you want to know if the animal is there or not, if they are conscious or not, or how bad or severe their brain injury is. So we need something like that, and it's almost impossible to get, you know, quick MRI or CT scan for animals, especially for smaller animals like smaller cats and dogs. So we thought, okay, so let's see and explore that area. And we went and we talked to veterinary professionals, both technicians and doctors. And we were just surprised, and it was really encouraging to see that there is a very big market for this device in the veterinary space. And we also talked to, you know, competitors. We talked to potential partners and CROs that do a lot of animal studies, and we learned a lot from all of those interviews. Next, please. So this is our business model in week 8. So at the end, we're, you know, really had a good understanding of our market and customer needs, and we refined our business thesis, and we, you know, we kind of like validated some of the hypotheses we had, and we invalidated some of them. And you should be brave to do a lot of invalidation. Next, please. So yeah, it was great to have a good understanding of the market size. So we identified the beachhead market, which is define as the market that your first entry point, that is that you are very familiar with, and you have very good connections in that space. You understand their needs very well. It may not be the largest market, but this is the easiest one for you to penetrate. So we identified the beachhead market to be stroke research market, but also we identified larger market for CROs and also for the veterinary medicine. Next, please. And so I don't know how I'm doing in terms of time, but Peter, how much time do I have?
About 3 or 4 minutes, maybe
Okay.
5 at the total.
Okay. So I just want to tell you about the resources that I use and are available to everyone in this region. So we got a couple of phase 0 SBIR grants from Alaska SBDC, and these are grants that help startups for writing successful SBIR proposals. So I got one for my phase 1 SBIR, and I'm writing my phase 2 application right now, and I got a grant from Alaska SBDC to help me with that. So you can hire consultants, for example, to help you with your commercialization plan, and you can talk to grant writing experts to review your work and help you to revise. And also, I'm very grateful for the support, both financially and also a lot of other supports that I got from Alaska Center ICE. It's just great to feel that you are a part of this community. So in Alaska, I understand that we are small, but at the same time, we care a lot about each other, and we want each other to be successful. And so that's the spirit of Alaska Center ICE. And also, once you get the NIH funding, NIH also provides some other supports for you. For example, they gave money for startups to do market analysis. So you will work with NIH assigned companies to do a comprehensive market assessment for you. And I think those services might be available for people before even they get their SBIR. There are some, depending on which institute you want to apply to, they have application preparation grants as well. So they connect you to some other companies, and they will provide consulting services for you to write a strong proposal. And so just recently, I gave a pitch at, Peter can help me, Pacific Northwest Showcast Symposium, something like this. And so it was interesting. It was a group of people from WAMI states. And so we have this ITHS, which is the Institute for Translational Health Sciences, I guess, in Seattle. And they help the Seattle area community, but also they provide services for other states. And I just met with their director of technology development, and I learned from him that so a lot of those services are available to WAMI state startups and researchers. And this is a great and a valuable resource to use because they have lots of connections, and they have done this kind of work over and over. So they have seen many different scenarios. So if you have any questions, I would strongly recommend to connect with each of these regional hubs and resources and get the help that you need. And they are there for you, and they really want and care about startup community, and they want you to become successful. I think that's all I had. Next, please. Yeah, and so we are at the company right now. We are looking for a startup CEO because so now that we want to scale up and for our phase 2 SBIR activities, and there's just a lot more to be done. So if you know someone that has the entrepreneurial spirit and they want to be a part of our mission, please send them our way. And next one, get in touch, please. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to connect with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Bahara. Great to hear your story and seeing those lines crossed out on that business model canvas always makes me smile in a good sense, because it shows that you've learned something in that process and you've crossed off something that you originally thought, and you've ended up with something new that actually is what you can then take forwards to the next growth and the next direction, because you validated it. You've gone out and got feedback from the community you're going into. It's always good that something did get crossed out, because it just means that you've been able to assess that isn't the direction, and not invested the time that would have been lost going down that route. So that's great. So thanks for that. And as I say, if anybody wants to follow up with Bahara, then please put your information in the chat, and we can connect you up with her. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Kelly Drew, and she's going to talk about BeCool Pharmaceutics and the work that she's been doing there, and how she's grown and developed since she started up. And then we'll have some time at the end, and I've got a few questions to bring up to both Bahara and Kelly, and any questions that you bring in the chat. So over to you, Kelly.
Well, thank you very much. It was great to hear Bahara's story. And also, I just always want to say thank you to Center ICE, because they're helpful in so many ways. Just the OIPC at UAF. So I get confused. Center ICE is still different than OIPC. OIPC is its own office, and Center ICE is more of a, how would you call it?
OIPC is a technology transfer office. All academic institutions have an office to help on the licensing and invention disclosures from university-based research. So, and then Center ICE is more like an innovation hub, where it's a connecting point back into the university to researchers like Bahara and Kelly that we have here that transition their technologies out, but also to those businesses once they're looking for opportunities, whether it is customer discovery training or connecting to academics that can help them. It's really a collaborative network with some funding available and training. So it's sort of that hub process that helps those technologies that are being recognized at the university to transition out into the environment. And the two of you are two examples of technologies developed through the university that have then transitioned out and become successful businesses.
Yeah, so it's been great to receive support and also to work with UAF, because there's been a great, since the time I've been here, there's really been a shift in culture to promote entrepreneurialism. And so, you get a conflict of interest plan in place, and then you can, UAF is really good to work with. And so maybe that we'll have time for discussion. But so I founded a company called BeCool Pharmaceutics that ultimately is really meant to translate the technology we've learned from study of hibernating animals about what drives hibernation for neurocritical care. And it is exciting for a lot of reasons. But yeah, next slide, I'll tell you my story. So part of the story is that we started with a focus on cardiac arrest. So there's a lot of different aspects to neurocritical care: cardiac arrest, stroke, traumatic brain injury, and spinal cord injury. We started with cardiac arrest because it was the lowest hanging fruit. It was already cooling. So we study hibernation, and now we know how to induce hibernation, a hibernation-like phenomenon in animals that don't normally hibernate. And the idea is to translate that to humans. So you need to be able to pick an indication, a medical indication where that's important. And we had picked cardiac arrest and had gone through the I-Corps program and had interviewed also about 100 people, including neurocritical care clinicians, and had identified what was of value to them that our technology would meet for cardiac arrest. And one thing that we learned was that it's really, how are you going to get people to adopt your technology? And we learned that there are two things. One are key opinion leaders, and the other are guidelines for clinical care. So the American Heart Association and the International Liaison for Resuscitation Consortium or something like that, ILCOR and AHA are the ones that prescribe the guidelines for cardiac arrest. And their guidelines have been cooling. You're supposed to cool people, and it's not always easy to cool people. Well, just this year in June, there was a clinical trial published that showed that it was really fever management. Fever management in cardiac arrest was no better than, or cooling was no better than fever management. So this is a really big deal because it's very likely to change the guidelines. So a really important aspect of adoption now is going to go away. And so we had to quickly pivot, and we have pivoted from cooling now to fever management. And luckily, the mechanism works. It's the same thing. And a colleague had already shown just this year that the drug that we're developing will block fever in a subarachnoid hemorrhage model. So the problem is that with any kind of neurocritical situation, fever is very bad. Fever is associated with bad outcome, morbidity, and death. And with subarachnoid hemorrhage, when you have blood in the subarachnoid space, the fever, in fact, most neurological or fever in these situations is called neurogenic fever. So it's not your standard fever, it's fever generated because of brain injury. And so it doesn't respond to typical non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like aspirin and Tylenol and some of the others they use in the hospital. So, so that's the problem, is how to stop fever in situations that other drugs don't work. And we were speaking to a clinician about this, and he said he had a patient just like the week before that had a fever up to like 110 and went into multi-organ failure because they couldn't get his fever down. And this was a patient that had had subarachnoid hemorrhage. So that is a problem. So next slide. And our solution is that we block the body's heat production. And it works exactly the same way as hibernating animals block heat production as they to suppress metabolism and enter hibernation. And so this is data that shows that it works in rats. And then the technology is I guess the novelty that we want to target the brain with a particular drug, the CHA molecule that stimulates the adenosine A1 receptor in the brain. But when you give that in a clinically relevant way by IV or some kind of systemic administration, you also activate all the adenosine receptors in the heart and outside, in the periphery. Well, adenosine and CHA is famous for stopping the heart. So it's not a real good thing to happen. And so what we do is we combine an antagonist that blocks the receptors outside of the brain with an agonist that reaches the brain to stimulate those receptors. And so by subtraction, we target the brain. And so that's kind of the basic technology. So next slide. And it's better than standard of care because it targets the very mechanism in the brain that has to be activated to generate heat. And so it stops fever, it doesn't cause general sedation. So standard of care currently they use, to cool people, they use sedative hypnotics, narcotics, and, like anesthetics. And so the problem for stroke or subarachnoid hemorrhage is a category of stroke. It doesn't work. It's not good because in conscious stroke patients, the standard of care is they follow their neuro exam, they follow neurologic function over time. And so if they're sedated or the other always the go-to if you can't stop somebody from shivering is they give a paralytic. And so both of those are contraindicated for when you want to look to see what someone's neural function is. And so we are able to do that without sedation. We stop the fever. Our drug blocks seizure. It's an anticonvulsant, and seizure is another thing that exacerbates brain injury. And so your brain gets injured, it goes into seizure, and that seizure makes the injury worse. And so this drug is also an anticonvulsant. And so the long-term best outcome would be that we improve survival with good neurologic outcome. And it's better than what's currently available, like for the reasons I just told you. So next slide. And so we also did this value proposition, and now we've pivoted. So we haven't interviewed nearly as many clinicians yet, but we're in that process. We have to repeat the process. But for what we have heard is that they want to stop the fever, like I told you about. They want to avoid sedation or paralytics. They want to suppress seizure, and they want to improve outcome. So it's really in line with what we can do. So next slide. And this is our team. It's myself and Bernard Laughlin, who works in my lab. Sometimes he works for the company. That's another bit of a story. And then Judy Kelleher is a good friend and colleague who is my business advisor that I meet with weekly. And without her help, I wouldn't be moving forward. Next slide. And so it's really fun when you go through that. You learn through the I-Corps program how to calculate the market size. This is called bottoms up. And so basically knowing how many people are affected by the condition when you're talking about a drug, how many people are affected by the condition, how many of those would actually have access to your drug, and then how many of those you're likely to actually reach. So that would be the total, the serviceable available, and the serviceable obtainable. And so it's a small market. Anything in neurocritical care is a small market, but the thing that is a saving grace is that it qualifies for orphan status. Any serviceable available market, less than 200,000 patients, is an orphan drug. And so you submit an application for orphan drug status, and once you get that approved, that application can be worth as much as $100 million. So it's a story of itself. And so next slide. This is our strategy. We're still way over here. I don't know, you can't see my cursor, but we're clear over on the left. And we need to do a new phase 1 SBIR or STTR since we've now pivoted to subarachnoid hemorrhage, and we're hoping to raise support through investors. FFF is founder, friends, and family. Next slide. And so, yeah, I wanted to save time for discussion, and so this is our summary. We call it a first-in-class thermolytic agent. It is a significant advantage over what's currently available. And if you guys were investors, I'd be asking for $750,000 to match our phase 1 STTR. And I think that's it. So
thanks, Kelly, for that. As I said, if anybody is interested to connect up with Kelly and her team, then please do send a message in the chat, or reach out to us at Center ICE and or Kelly's information here, and we'd be happy to connect up with you. So we've got about 15 minutes or so, and I've got a few questions just to get maybe the discussion going between the three of us. So when you were starting off your business, what was, if you think back, what was some of the best advice you got as you were kicking off? Because both of you have and I had a more traditional academic career before moving into this business environment. What was some of the best advice that you got, or maybe some advice that you got and like didn't really help you out? Maybe some of the best, and maybe some of the advice that you received and you're like, well, that didn't really help me, sort of. So you can sort of pass some of those lessons to the others listening in and those that watch later on.
For me, it was an opportunity to go to the national SBIR STTR, the NIH conference, and to learn about the mechanisms and how to apply and all the ins and outs. but honestly, I could have used a whole lot more advice that I didn't have, but that definitely got me started. And that's, I think, one of the benefits to doing this. But I'll stop so Bahara can say something.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, you participate in a lot of workshops and like, for example, it wasn't centralized at that time. I guess it was OIPC that had the grant writing workshop. So that was very helpful for beginners like us. We hadn't submitted any SBIR before. So that was very helpful. But then later I tried to go and learn more about the nuances of writing SBIR proposals, and I couldn't find any. Like, I participated in other workshops and they say the same thing over and over. So it's really good to get connected to those people who have been through this, who have submitted, who have been rejected, who have been, awarded, and see what they did differently, and have them to review your work before you submit. And to me, I mean, we had great resources in Fairbanks for sure, and it's always good to keep expanding your network. Reach out to other people and talk to people. I always tell my friends when they are thinking about starting a company that so you should have this spirit to go out and talk to people, and maybe out of like 100 conversations, casual conversations that you might have with investors, with partners, with just people that you want to get on board. So maybe a couple of them would lead to a fruitful, collaboration, and those are just enough for you. But you have to go out and get exposure to different opportunities and to find the right people.
Yeah, I'd second that. I was just lucky that I had a really good friend who ran an R&D company on SBIR grants for about 15 years, and he just gave amazing criticism. Lots of red ink on my draft, what I thought was a final draft. So it really helped a lot.
Yeah, I would agree, both of you. The business work that I did, we had somebody advising us who had been successful on SBIRs and had run some companies that he'd sold on, and that without that, the academic side of the two of us, we would have seen it as an academic proposal to a traditional funding agency, and didn't align up with what was an SBIR submission, which can be quite different. In terms of starting up your company, what surprised you the most in those initial 6 months or so? What was the big surprise that you didn't think about, or sort of caught you and then you eventually got through it? What was the biggest surprise?
I think for me, when I got I really didn't take forward motion very seriously until I got an STTR grant. And then the thing that took me by surprise is how hard it was to find a good accountant. So, because I'm used to grants management, I'm used to reports at the university of what you see when you're managing, you have a grant that is being managed. And I went to an accounting firm and they said, yeah, we can do this. But it turns out they knew absolutely nothing. And I had people the former director of our grants and management office as a consultant. They talked, they met, and nobody knew they weren't talking the same language. And so the difference was that the accountants use QuickBooks, and none of the UAF account managers have ever used QuickBooks. And so they had no clue, they had no idea. And it was a disaster.
Yeah, I remember those days. So lessons learned is just like this, because Kelly had been through this. And when I got my SBIR, she said, you don't want to do it this way, do it the other way. So which was, having a contract with, and there are many right now, companies that just do grant management for SBIR, STTR awardees. And it turned out, at the beginning, it was kind of like, expensive to me. But with, SBIR grants, you get the indirect to the company. So that makes you that's helpful, and you can pay for those services. But at the end, when we talked with Kelly about this, it turned out to be even cheaper when you do that, rather than, having to do it over and over. But one thing that I would add about, what surprised me, so it didn't happen at the very early stages, but as I got to do this customer discovery, there were lots of surprises. And so I remember when Nigel Sharp joined UAF, he said, you should do this customer discovery. And I was kind of like, hesitant to do that. I had done a mini I-Corp before, which was over 2 weeks, and we're supposed to do 10 interviews. And it was such a painful experience for me, because in 2 weeks, you want to reach out to people and get them to talk to you. And it's very difficult. People don't like to talk to you. Even if you're not asking for money, still, it's so hard to get a hold of people that are, in this area and, want to share stories with you. So I didn't want to do that. But when I got this SBIR grant, so I realized that to have a stronger phase 2, I need to do this. And with, very limited knowledge of what's going to happen. So again, luckily, Kelly had done it. And she said, you must do it. It's really good. It's very intense.
I made you do it.
Right. And I'm so glad that I did. And it's amazing. So I know that Center ICE runs kind of again, mini I-Corp, and if you are interested, and you just learn a lot, and you see a lot of surprises. You reject a lot of hypotheses and thoughts that you had, but it's really in a good way, because then it makes you to pivot. And before you spend just so much time and money and effort into your business, you get a very good understanding of what's in front of you, and pivot to make your business more successful.
I agree with everything you've said, and thank you for pointing out about our innovation core small site program. That is that first step to get out of the lab, get out of the space. Obviously, it's virtual now, so you're getting out of your computer and into your meetings with individuals. But yeah, that's definitely one aspect. And then the other one that you mentioned about the accounting. I was fortunate with my business, with the project we had. One of our collaborators had used a company that managed the connections with the Department of Defense that was funding the work. So they were able to take on a lot of the reporting and that side of it. And then they were sort of being that third logistics party along with the scientific side. And that we were very fortunate that actually helped us out, so we could focus on the R&D and the innovation development and that organization. So, but that was all about networking. And I think, Bahari, you said that is, we've got a statewide entrepreneurial network here in Alaska that is growing, and you can connect up to different groups. But sometimes it does take potentially finding somebody that you're willing and interested to work with that may not be in your region. And I think you spoke about the Pacific Northwest Showcase event, and then there's the Ascend Hub that was the Western states. I think that and you yourself are now positioned down in the contiguous 48, and you mentioned Nigel Sharp, who's now at Aquaga. They've got a Tacoma base. So there's different aspects of the and Kelly, with your advisor, that you're connecting outside Alaska, so you're building your network, and it's always good to grow, because then you find that person that can advocate for you to get the recommendation for the person you need for the next stage, whether it's getting you, Kelly, in front of a group of investors. You're using that connecting point to get you to that next point, rather than just saying, oh, I'm in Alaska, I've got my Alaska network, it's going to work. It's like you do need those external connecting points that can help you to grow. And while you may continue to do your R&D in Alaska to grow and develop, you do need those external collaborators, connectors, advocates, points of contact that you can reach out to when you need them. You may not need them all the time, but you may need them at a very, very specific point. So for the last 5 minutes, we did this on Monday. I've got a question: is what questions would you have for each other? what questions, Bahara, would you like to ask Kelly from her experiences, or Kelly back to Bahara? I didn't tell them about this, so this is a what would they like to what would you like to ask each other about your, because obviously you've worked very closely, Bahara, you were in Kelly's lab, but you don't interact on a day-to-day basis as much as you used to. So what are some of the, maybe a question you'd like to ask each other about your development and what's coming next?
I have two questions for Bahara.
I have a question for you too.
Right. One question is, what's it like down in the entrepreneurial space in Seattle? I'm really curious about that. And my other question is, how did you make such beautiful slides? Did you do that yourself, or was that you just have a talent there?
No, and I use the templates. And,
okay.
So there are just lots of templates available, and you can just make them.
Okay, that was the easy one.
Okay, yeah. But in terms of your first question, so I'm still new here, but I mean, the thing is that there is a kind of like, it's not very new, but it seems to be a recent initiative and interest in life sciences startup in Seattle. So I see a lot of activities just around life sciences, which was kind of like a surprise to me. I did not know that. So they started to, think about it that, because of University of Washington, medical school, and some, kind of like a stronger companies that started here in Seattle. It seems that, there's a trend for life sciences. And so the nice thing is that, so I met with someone at ITHS today in person. So that was really good. And you forget how, after being on the screen for like 2 years, you forget how important this, physical meetings are. And it was just amazing. It was very different. Like, on Zoom, you are kind of like informal, and conversations are kind of like structured. But when you meet in person, over coffee or something, it's just the casual conversations can go in many different directions. And so I'm enjoying some of those, options that I have here. And so my question for you, Kelly, is that, so I know that we both had this challenge in Alaska to recruit talents that we need for our company. How do you deal with that in these days and in this, Zoom era time?
Well, it's really hard. It's the definitely industry when industry that is not partially academic moves a lot faster, and that is one of the biggest problems that we have in Alaska too, is being able to recruit people with the right talent and the right drive to really be as productive as that you really need to be. And also, yeah, so I haven't really solved that problem. But I mean, I would so love to be able to have my own space. I mean, like my colleague Judy, what she was able to do when she was in Maryland and doing her animal work is she was able to use space in an incubator at the University of Maryland where she did her animal work. And so, it was geared towards small companies and had their own IACUC. And I mean, so in academia, there's just so many hurdles and barriers that are different than when you're in a company. So it would be so much fun to have that infrastructure in Alaska. But I don't think it's going to happen for a while. And so now, it's still, though, I count my blessings that UAF is so accommodating. So they let us, I can have somebody working for the company that can come in and work in UAF's animal facility. They allow that to happen. They provide access, and they have to do all the safety trainings and everything, and they have to be on the IACUC. But it has worked out. But yeah, being able to recruit people, particularly, it's really difficult for the company because people would prefer to work for the university when they can get benefits, and there's no way that a company can compare. And so, one approach is to pay more, pay the difference in what you would otherwise make in benefits, which is, I guess, the answer there. but still being able to support full-time employment for somebody like that takes a lot of money.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for both of your questions. But it's now the top of the hour. We had one statement from Jane saying that as a previous businesswoman, she sees one of the most important things in pursuing it is keeping returning to the main premise and keeping returning to the philosophy of how you're and the belief in the products, where you might pivot an industry, pivot an idea, but you're still following that philosophy that you set out as a business owner, and your passion and your mission. And I can see from both of you that you still, even though you've done some pivots, some changes, some different value propositions, it's still having that passion, and that the idea that you had when you started keeps you going and keeps you looking at opportunities and allows you to move forwards and grow and look for opportunities. So I'd like to thank you both for your time today. It's been great hearing where you've got to and where you're still looking to go. So anybody that's interested in connecting with Center ICE, please just reach out. You can send a message to us or go and find us on our website. We have this Innovation Core Customer Discovery Training, which is the first step on the road towards where Bahara and Kelly have reached, and the national program, some of these funding mechanisms. So as I say, please reach out. Thank you for your time today. And I wish you a great rest of your Wednesday. So it's